Lead and Learn with Occupational Health and Safety. My name is Amu Mulema, as had previously discussed in the first video. Today we're going to discuss the health and safety file. In full, I will call it the Occupational Health and Safety file, right? Now, a health and safety file is one of the most important documents that is requested on a project when you're starting a project. It is a document that is actually, it's a legal pack of documents. It's actually a legal pack of requirements by the construction regulation. It's in section 7.1, where it states that a contractor should have a safety file on site, nowhere else, right? It should be on site, placed on site, and always available for inspection or auditing by the inspector, by the client agent, or even by any other contractor that may be interested in the safety file details. A safety file, it's also one of those things that have to be site specific, guys. Like, you cannot make, okay, I've worked, or I've heard of smaller and contractors that say they want to make a copy of a safety file from one site because they want to take it to another site. In that way, they're just running away from paying for another safety file. Fine. But now you cannot do that, because a safety file is one of those things that are site specific, guys. A safety file is site specific because, remember, every site has different types of hazards, and different types of hazards need different types of control measures. So you cannot take control measures that you implemented on that site and try to implement them on this new site, because sites are different, environment change, people change, risks change, right? So it's very important to always remember that a safety file has to be site specific. Okay, so let's just jump right into the contents of the safety file. Number one, I would talk about the mandatory agreement, which is also called the 37/2 agreement. It's quite important to have in the safety file. It has to be signed by both the client and also the principal contractor. If you are a subcontractor, then it has to be signed by the principal contractor and the subcontractor, just depending on which level you are at, right? Okay, and then the next one would be a letter of good standing, a UIF, and legal liability. This I would like to put it in under one folder or one section. Your letter of good standing has to be valid. It has to have the company name on the letter of good standing. It has to also have a policy number. So this is how you make sure that it's actually real and not fake. Number one, by checking for the policy number, checking that it's got the company name that is also on the safety file with the safety file documents, and also checking the validity of the safety file. It has to be within the year space of the current year. And then your UIF documents. UIF is just proving that the company is making funds towards UIF on behalf of employees, right? And then the other one would be your legal liability. Legal liability is to cover the outside public and other people that may be affected by the works that we are doing here on your project, on your particular project. And then the next one would be an appointment letter by the client or by the principal contractor, once again, just depending on where you are, whether you're a subcontractor or a principal contractor. You need an appointment letter just to show that you are not doing this job kamroba, but rather you have been appointed for this job. You've been legally appointed and are doing this job legally. So by a signed appointment letter has to be signed by the client and also by the principal contractor, right? And then the next item also to have in your safety file would be a client spec. A client specification, you would get it from the client, and also you would get it from the client, comprehensive of everything that is involved in the project. And also with the client spec, it has to be not only do you have to have it in the safety file, but it has to be communicated to the employees as well, right? Okay, and then the next item to have in your safety file would be your work permit or your notification of construction. Now, depending on the type of project that you have, you will have either or. If your project is above 13 million, if your project has more than 1.8 people working on the site, and also if your project exceeds 6 months, then you have to apply for a construction work permit. But if your project is less than 13 million, if it's got less than 1.8 people that are involved in this project, it could exceed 6 months, but that is something we can also play around. But these two, if it exceeds 13 million and exceeds 1.8, if it's below 1.8 people and also it's below 13 million in project price, then we need to apply for a notification of construction. Okay, so just note down what I said. 13 million, 1.8 people, and also less or more than 6 months, right? Okay, and then the next item to have in your safety file would be your health and safety objectives. Now, your health and safety objectives would be, what do you want to achieve with this being a safety officer or a safety rep or a safety personnel or a safety department within the company? What is your safety objectives, your SHE objectives, your health, safety and environmental objectives at the end of this project? And then the next item to have would be the health and safety plan. Your health and safety plan would just be like everything that outlines how you're planning on identifying risks, to how you plan on controlling the risks that you're going to find on the site. Now, your health and safety plan, you must just try to be as comprehensive as you can on your safety plan, cover from every single aspect of health and safety in this project. Your health and safety plan also has to be project specific, site specific, because you cannot take a safety plan of a previous project or that project and try to implement it on this current project, because like I mentioned, that risks are different, teams are different, hazards are different. So meaning that even our control measures towards these risks are going to be different, and hence outlined clearly outlined in the health and safety plan, right? Okay, and then your next one would be your environmental plan. Your environmental plan would be things like your waste plan, how you plan on doing like maybe you want to have a recycling system that you want to have on site, or maybe a separation system, as opposed to like just dumping, having illegal dumping on site or just illegal dumping somewhere else. So within your environmental plan, that's where you're going to be stating as to how are we going to be getting rid of our waste on site. And then remember the polluter pays principle, and also the from cradle to grave principle when you are doing your environmental plan / waste management plan, right? Emergency response plan, it would be the next one, right? Your emergency response plan, though, that would be inclusive of your emergency response plan. How would you be responding to emergencies on site? And also it will also be inclusive of the types of emergencies that could be expected on the site: fire, bombs, or a civil attack by maybe like riot attacks. So those are the types of emergency responses that you need to have a plan for. And also something that I did recently learn is that it would also be nice to have a evacuation drill. Well, evacuation drills are things that we need to have every now and then within the project. So an evacuation drill task, I guess it's a task because it's not a plan, it's just task. Or your evacuation drill plan would also be one of the important things that are supposed to be attached to your emergency response plan. Okay, and then your next item would be your incident management plan. Your incident management plan would constitute of what would you need in the case of an incident, in the case of an accident on site. One, you will need your WCL 2 forms, or your WCL1 if it's a disease, since we live in Corona times. You will need your Annexure 1 documents. You will need your incident investigation procedures, and you will also need your incident registers under your incident management plan. Now this is just you telling us how do you plan on controlling, or how do you plan on attending to an incident in the case of incidents or accidents on site. How do you plan on attending to it? What is your step 1, step 2, step 3, right? And then I always say that these documents, they don't have to be long pages. They just have to be 1 page, 2 page, just outlining, I'm going to do this, do that, do that. But it is important to always have your supporting documents that show us what are the documents that we need when in the case of an emergency, what are the documents that we need when we have to be now controlling this incident on site. And then the next documents that you're going to need, or the next items in your safety file, would be your company policies. Now your company policies would include things like your HIV policy, your drugs and alcohol policy, your PPE policy, your environmental policies, and your SHE policies. SHE meaning your safety, health, and environmental policies. These policies, it's very important to make sure that they are signed by the CEO/16(1) of the project, of the company actually, and also they are dated. So those are quite important things to remember on your company policies. The next item would be your company organogram. I feel like organogram, we're gonna have to discuss it on its own on a different, it's like gonna take a whole different video to be discussing the company organogram, or rather the site organogram, because a company organogram is not always the same as the site organogram. Yes, there could be the company organogram that constitutes of everybody who's involved in the company, but then there's also the site organogram, which is only including people that are on this site. But like I said, it would have to be an entire video on its own, just discussing the organogram, because I know some people struggle with structuring the organogram. But yeah, so the next item would be your company organogram, signed also by the CEO or the 16.2. The next item would be your legal appointments that are going to go attached with the competencies. Now, when it comes to legal appointments, it's very important to know which legal appointments require formal competencies and which legal appointments don't necessarily require a formal competency. Formal competency would be like a competency that comes from an educational institution, like for example NOSA, or a school, or like a diploma or something like that. And then informal competencies would be competencies that you as a safety officer or as the safety manager, you have created on your own by giving informal training to employees via like informal trainings, via toolbox talk, via DSTI, basically like showing you how to use this or how to use that, how to inspect this, how to inspect that. For example, how to inspect a ladder, how to inspect a power tool, how to inspect a how to inspect a hand tool as well. So those are some of the ones that would not necessarily need formal training, but informal training could also do. And then stuff like the health and safety rep, the health and safety officer, the incident investigator, the 16.2, the excavation supervisor, the construction vehicle operator, the plant operators. Those are types of legal appointments that actually do need formal training, and actually also need, usually if it's not formal training, it's a license number. License number also just usually means that there has been formal training that has been conducted. And then the next item would be your safe work procedures. Your safe work procedures would also just depend on the task that we are doing, the type of task that we are doing on the site. this information, you would get it from the site agent or from the foreman on site. He will tell you what we are doing, and depending on what we're doing, you need to get safe work procedures based on those tasks. Method statements also. Method statements and safe work procedures would actually also go hand in hand, because for every safe work procedure there should be a method statement, and for every method statement, safe work procedure, there should be a risk assessment. These three documents, I usually pair them together. I usually make them go together because they should communicate the same thing. You know, they should go hand in hand. Just that the safe work procedure, risk assessment, up to method statement, they touch on different aspects of the task, but they are basically the same thing. I mean, for example, if you've got a jackhammer, if you're using a jackhammer on site, you need a safe work procedure for a jackhammer, a method statement of a for the safe use of a jackhammer, and also a risk assessment. The difference between these documents, right, for me would be that a safe work procedure, it's done by the foreman. A method statement, it's done by the site agent because it's less detailed. And then a risk assessment would be done by the safety officer or safety rep on site. Now, putting all these documents together, these are also some of the context that is also needed in the safety file, but putting these documents close by together so that they can communicate to one another. Okay, and then the next item would be the DSTI and the PTO. What is that? Okay, so the DSTI is a daily safety task instruction. This is done by the foreman on a daily basis. Or a PTO. A PTO is a planned task observation. Planned task observation, it's done by either the site agent or the safety officer or safety rep. Now, what is the difference between these two documents? A DSTI would be done by the foreman just before we start working, when he gives us what to do, what are the hazards with this task, and how can we protect ourselves while doing this task, right? And these are instructions that he gives us before we start working. And then the PTO would be an observation by the safety officer or the site agent, where in this case you're not giving anybody instruction, you're not telling anybody what to do, how to do it. So it would be done by the site agent in the sense that he would just observe as to what is being done and how are they doing it, and then he'll give a report on what is being done and how it's being done, and maybe even some of my own suggestions. So being a safety officer or a safety rep, it will also be advisable to let your site agents do PTOs every now and then, or even just fellow workers to do PTOs on their fellow employees. This would just give you insight as to how they look at the work, what level of safety awareness are they on, because then he should be able to say, I saw this guy working unsafely on a step ladder. If a site agent cannot say such on his own regard and say, I saw this guy working unsafely on a step ladder, then that tells you that safety awareness, it's not quite strong on your site, right? So PTO, I would say that we use it as a form of feedback, to get just feedback as to what is the general safety culture, what is the general safety awareness on site. Okay. And then the next item in your safety file would be your registers and your checklists. Now, your registers and your checklists, like, once again, they would depend on what we are doing currently on the site. If we're using power tools, if we're using hand tools, if we're using vehicles on site, PPE checklists, first aid checklists, incident register checklists, those kind of things. Just depending on what we are doing on the site would also lead you and tell you what kind of registers and what kind of checklists we need on site. And then also we will have toolbox talk topics. Toolbox talk topics, I like to have topics on their own and then have registers on their own. This just helps you with the day you just need to do a toolbox talk. You can just go through the topics that are relevant to the job, relevant to the project or the task, and then you just pick one, have a toolbox talk topic, toolbox talk session, sign, and put it back in a different file. The next item would be medicals. Now, medicals are also one of the important things to have in a safety file. It's actually a legal requirement. You find it in Construction Regulation 7 as one of the duties of the principal contractor. You need to ensure that every single employee that is working for you has a medical certificate that is issued by an occupational health and safety occupational health practitioner, right? That is like an OHS doctor. The medical has to be valid for a year. The medical has to have the person's details on it, and also the medical has to come in a form of an annexure 3. And the next point would be employees' details. Employees' details is just good to have in the safety file because it's one of those things that in the case of an emergency, you will have information about this particular person. You will have his ID, his work permit, if they are like foreign people, their work permit, and it has to be valid, of course. You would also have their next of kin and their home addresses and their next of kin contact numbers. This is now in the case of something happens to the employee on site, they cannot speak, you need to call their families and let them know that something's come up at work and the employee is not okay, we're taking him to the hospital. How would you do that if you don't have their information? Hence, you need their next of kin information. Usually I always say, just give me like your wife or your brother, your father, or anybody who's actually even within radius of where you're staying, because don't give me people that are like, you know, over there with you in Limpopo or there in KZN. Honey, no. How am I going to get to KZN? I need to call people that are at least that are within, even if you're living with friends. Let them give you numbers of friends or people that you can call quickly to come to assist, or just can call the family to let them know what has happened. Then the next point would be induction and induction records. Induction, remember, it's also one of those mandatory things that we need to have on site. It's also a legal requirement. Section 13 of the Act, duty to inform. We need to have induction because everybody needs to know what are the hazards that they're coming across in the workplace. What are some of the control measures that have been put in place and how we need to abide to those control measures, right? And all that will be done via induction for everybody. Now remember, induction also, there's two types of inductions. There is induction for employees, and then there'll also be induction for visitors. Induction for visitors, usually I just keep it in a separate file, not necessarily in my safety file. I keep it in a separate safety file for visitors. The difference now is that the visitors safety file, the visitors induction is super short, because now you're just letting them know that these are the hazards on site. Please be careful, avoid your phone, please wear our PPE, and always ensure that you are working with somebody on site, not alone. Whereas the induction for employees, it's more detailed, it's a whole lot more. Yeah. Then the next item would be the MSDSs. MSDSs, depending on the type of hazards, type of chemicals that you're using on site, hazardous chemical substances that you're using on site, you will have MSDSs. MSDSs also need to be communicated to employees. So you'll have your MSDSs. Now, another thing that is just a nice thing to do is to have copies in your file, and also have copies in your storeroom where the HCSs are stored. Just have it next to that particular item. If you're storing your paints here, you'll have an MSDS for paint. If you're storing your oils, your thinners, your diesels and petrols, you just have the particular MSDS just right next to or above it, just so that in the case of an emergency, the MSDS is right there. It's accessible for anybody to see how to switch off the flame, how to clean up the spillage, or even how to deal with any exposures of the HCS. Then another item that we're supposed to have in the safety file would be your safety audit reports. This now also depends whether you're a principal contractor or a contractor, subcontractor. If you're a contractor, subcontractor, you will have audit reports by the principal contractor in your safety file. And then if you're a principal contractor, you will have audit reports by the client in your safety file, right? And then your audit reports also should go with action plans. Action plans meaning that these are the deviations that the auditor has found. What actions am I taking to fix this? Or am I going to take, or have I taken to fix this deviation? You just put it in an action plan. Action plan can be in literally any format, any template. It's not strict. And then it's also important to have your Occupational Health and Safety Act, or your the Health and Safety Act and the construction regulation. Now with this, you know how huge it is, right? It's this big. Just the act on its own, it's huge. Like, it's really thick. It's almost half a room of papers, I think. So usually with this, I like to get posters. We have posters that we can just post on the walls. If you have this on the walls, I really don't think any inspector would mind you not having it in the file and say, no, I have it on the walls because of the size of the document. Just have it as posters on the walls. The Health and Safety Act, construction regulation, the basic employment regulations, or the Basic Employment Act. These are some of the important legal or regulations that are important to have on your safety file. Now guys, that was a mouthful. It was a whole lot of things that are in the safety file that go. But now remember, the most important thing also about the safety file is that it has to be according to the client's specifications. Some of the things that I have mentioned might not be in the client spec. If it's not in the client spec, I mean, lucky for you, less work, but it would be good to have it just for backup, because remember, when Department of Labor comes, they don't even care what the client spec says. They want what they want. I mean, if the client spec might have missed out on a notification of construction, or might have missed out on the tax clearance certificate, you're gonna get a misdemeanor. Like, you're gonna get a non-compliance, basically, because you do not have that particular item. So when you are doing a safety file, yes, most importantly, consider the client spec, but also just keep in mind some of the requirements by Department of Labor and what they would also like to have and see in your safety file. And guys, most of all, good luck with your careers and good luck with the job. I know how stressful it could be, but taking it one day at a time, implementing one control measure at a time, it's the best thing that could ever happen to a construction site, having you there. Yeah, I believe that having you there, being a safety rep, safety officer, safety manager, is the best thing that could have happened to the safety, to the project. So good luck, guys, and thank you for watching my channel. Thank you for watching my video. Please, guys, remember to subscribe. I know that was a mouthful. I hope I didn't bore you. Please remember to subscribe to my channel, like my videos, and also don't forget to comment on the comment section some of the things that you would like for us to talk about and touch on. And also don't forget to mark the register, baby. Let me know who's here. Do we have safety officers, safety reps, safety managers, safety consultants, baby? Let me know who's here. Thank you.